Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Kitabul Jihadi was Sair. In Sahih Muslim, this is the book of struggle and journeying out for the fight. Let's take the first chapter about the permission of making a raid without giving an ultimatum to the kuffar as long as the message of Islam has reached them. From Ibn Awn, he says, I wrote to Nafi', inquiring from him whether it was necessary to extend to the kuffar an invitation to accept Islam before fighting them. He replied saying that it was necessary in the early days of al-Islam. He says the Prophet raided Banu al-Mustaliq whilst they were unaware, and their cattle were drinking water. He killed those who fought and imprisoned others. And on that day he captured Juwairiya bint al-Harith. Nafi' says that this report was given to him by Abdullah ibn Umar, who was among the raiding troops. So this narration, which is given to us by Nafi' was the freed servant of Abdullah ibn Umar, and Ibn Umar narrated this to Nafi'. We take the obvious lesson from this narration that you are allowed to raid a people when they are unaware as long as the message of Islam has reached them and they did not embrace, and neither are they paying the jizya. He captured Juwairiya. Banu Mustaliq was a Jewish tribe, and she was a Jew who converted to Islam and was one of the wives of the Prophet. Let's take the next chapter about the advice given by the Imam to the leader of an army expedition. From Sulaiman ibn Burayd through his father, who says, when the Prophet appointed anyone as the military leader, he would exhort him to have taqwa of Allah and be good to his army who were with him. He would say, fight in the way of Allah, fight those who disbelieve in Allah, do not embezzle the spoils of war, do not break your pledge, and do not mutilate the dead bodies. Do not kill the children. When you meet your enemies, the mushrikun, invite them to three things. If they respond to any one of these, you accept it from them and keep them away from your harm. Invite them to embrace Islam. If they respond, accept it and desist from fighting them. If they accept this, then invite them to migrate from their lands to the land of the Muhajirun, so that would at that time be Al-Medina, and inform them that if they do so, they shall have the privileges and obligations of all the Muhajirin. But if they refuse to migrate, then tell them that they will have the status of the Bedouin Muslims, but will be subject to the commands of Allah like the other Muslims. But they will not gain any share of the spoils of war, except if they actually fight with the Muslims. If they refuse to accept Islam, then demand the jizya from them. If they agree, then accept it from them. If they refuse, seek Allah's help and fight them. And when you lay siege to a fort, and those who are besieged, they appeal to you for protection in the name of Allah and the Prophet, do not accord to them this guarantee of Allah and the Prophet, but rather accord to them your own guarantee and the guarantee of your companions. Because it is a lesser sin that the security given by you and your companions be disregarded than the security of Allah and the Messenger be disregarded, meaning that contract be violated between Allah and the Messenger. And when you besiege a fort and they want you to judge with the command of Allah, then do not say to them that this is the command of Allah, but rather give them your command, because you do not know whether your command that you give them will be in accordance with the actual command of Allah. Okay, fairly obviously there are many points of benefit which we can pick up from this lengthy narration. We pick up that the Khalifa or the leader appoints a ruler or a leader in an army detachment. And not just in an army detachment, the Prophet ordered that if three of you are traveling on a journey, any journey, then you need to appoint one of yourselves as an emir, a ruler, such that if a dispute does arise, the final say will be with the emir. The Prophet would send out a jaysh, which is an army, and a sariya, which is an army detachment. What's the difference? Well, the ulama say that a jaysh, an army, has 400 men, and a sariya has less than 400 men. In any case, an army is larger than an army detachment. We find that the premier advice that you can give to anyone, army detachment or otherwise, is to fear Allah Jalla wa Ala, taqwa of Allah. It's the premier and number one advice. All other advice emanates from this root advice. وَلَقَدْ وَصَّيْنَا الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ وَإِيَّاكُمْ أَنِ اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ. We have given the firm order of those who are given the book before you and yourselves to have taqwa of Allah. And the taqwa of Allah Jalla wa Ala is when you leave off that which Allah Jalla wa Ala hates or angers Him, and you do that which pleases him, seeking his pleasure. He would advise him to have taqwa of Allah in his own self, so do not forget the obedience of Allah, and have taqwa regarding those under your authority, so that you do not take liberties with them and treat them in the best of manner. He says, go on the expedition, so on the ghazwa, with the name of Allah. That is, seeking the help with the name of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Now there's two ways you could interpret it, and both are correct. It could be interpreted that the Prophet is saying that I send you on this expedition with the name of Allah, so seeking help and blessing in this name. And it could also mean that when you attack the enemy, then make mention of the name of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Just like, for example, when you slaughter an animal, you have to make mention of the name of Allah. And both of these interpretations are good. He says, fi sabilillah, so this is ordering people to have ikhlas, sincerity to Allah when you perform your action, seeking to see the face of Allah in Jannah. And then he says, fight those who commit kufr in Allah. So that's just an emphasis of what he said before, ughzu, go on a military expedition. So that involves fighting, but then he repeats it. He says, fight those who make kufr. And then he goes on to say, وَلَا تَغُلُّوا, do not make ghulul, which is when you take from the war booty without due right, because this is stealing and it is treachery. He says, وَلَا تُمَثِّلُوا, do not mutilate anyone. That is to say, if you capture a prisoner of war or somebody has surrendered, then do not cut his hand off or mutilate his body. Even if this person is worthy to be executed, you still do not mutilate him. So note that mutilating a harbi and also dealing with a harbi in riba, both of these are prohibited. However, one may ask at this point, what if the enemies mutilate one of us? Are we allowed to mutilate one of them, even if it is not the person who actually carried out the mutilation? The answer is yes. فَمَنِ اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ فَاعْتَدُوا عَلَيْهِ بِمِثْلِ مَا اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ. So if they transgress against you, then you can transgress against them. But then the question is, the person whom we mutilate, he is not the one who carried out the mutilation on one of us. And the answer to that is, they are all one and the same. Do not forget that they are one community. They are not individual, independent entities. Rather, they are one entity. It's a bit like a hostage situation. If we give them a hostage and they give us a hostage from their side, and if they kill our hostage, we are allowed to kill their hostage, despite the fact that their hostage, whom they gave to us, did not kill anyone. But the point is that they are all one person, or if you like, they are one entity. But the general rule is that you're not allowed to mutilate them neither before killing them nor after killing them. And the Prophet also says, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا وَلِيدًا, do not kill children. And there are two reasons for this. Number one, these children are not fighters. Otherwise, if they are fighters, then you're allowed to attack them and kill them. But normally they are not fighters, so you're not allowed to kill anyone who is not fighting nor contributing to helping the enemy. And then secondly, these children are more apt to embracing Islam than the adults. In the Sunan, the Prophet said, اقتلوا شيوخ المشركين واستبقوا شرخهم. Kill the elderly ones of the mushrikeen, but leave alone their young ones. And along with this category are women, because women are not normally fighters. Likewise, the elderly men who are not fighting, and anyone not involved with the fight, nor aiding the fighters. And the Prophet says, you call them to three choices. Whichever one they take, you must refrain from harming them and accept it. You call them to Islam first, and this is the ultimate aim. The aim is not to fight and kill them. This is never the aim. The aim is to have the ahkam of Islam as uppermost. And saving somebody from Jahannam is better than sending them to it. Note that they can embrace Islam without mentioning the official words of the Shahada. And this is what happened during the time when Khalid ibn Walid was leading an expedition. He came across a people who said, Saba'na, Saba'na, we have become Sabians. Because they thought that the Muslims are Sabians. Sabians are followers of another type of religion. But what these people intended was that we have become Muslims. But Khalid ibn Walid killed them because he did not understand their intent. And the Prophet freed himself from this action of Khalid ibn Walid. If they embrace Islam, you invite them to make hijrah. Because it is better that you live with the Muslims when you embrace Islam than live not in the company of Muslims, because you'll be in danger of leaving Islam if you're not surrounded by Muslims. And in this there is a great lesson for us to learn with regards to people nowadays embracing Islam. It is a happy moment. However, it is also a dangerous moment if you do not take the necessary steps. That is, to have them surrounded by practicing, observant Muslims. Because their iman is still undercooked. You still need to spend, if you like, more time in the oven to cook and solidify your iman. Their iman is raw, and to cook it up, you need to be in the company of righteous people. If you are by yourself, or if you are in the wrong company of kuffar or non-practicing Muslims, which may even be worse, then it is only a matter of time that this person will leave Islam. So if they do not make hijrah, then they will not have any share of the war booty, nor the spoils of war, unless they actually partake in the fighting. The ghanima is the wealth taken from the kuffar after the fight. This is given to the fighters. As for the fay, this is their wealth taken without the kuffar putting up a fight. This wealth is just transferred to the Baytul Mal for public expenditure. The second choice is that they can keep their deen, yet give the jizya. And this is the money that they pay so that they can remain resident and the Muslims will not fight them and in fact protect them from any outside forces, and that their wealth and their life will be sacred. Women and children do not need to pay the jizya from the kuffar, the men do. As for the rate of jizya, nothing is fixed in the text, so this is down to the ijtihad of the imam. But if they refuse even that, then he says, seek the help of Allah and fight them. We find that it is legislated to send the army out to the lands of the kuffar, but this is on the condition that Muslims have strength to do so. And we find you send out the army in accordance with the need. So if the need is for a larger army, you send out a larger army. If the need is only for a smaller army, you send out a smaller army, and so on. If the Muslims do not unite and make the word of Allah the highest, then the kuffar will make the word of kufr the highest. Either way, one of these two words will become the highest. We find that the reason that the Muslims fight these people is because of kufr, not because of any other matter. We are told in the Quran to fight the leaders of the kuffar, because if their leadership is broken, then all the rest of them underneath them will also become broken. وَإِن نَكَثُوا أَيْمَانَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ عَهْدِهِمْ وَطَعَنُوا فِي دِينِكُمْ فَقَاتِلُوا أَئِمَّةَ الْكُفْرِ. If they break their contract and speak ill of your deen, then fight the leaders of kufr. Now the hadith forbids ghulul. We mentioned what that is. Also from the ghulul is if you're working for the state, let's say collecting the zakah, and some gift is given to you. Accepting this gift is also from the ghulul, as in the report in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, Hadaya al-Ummal ghulul. Gifts given to workers is ghulul. You're taking this wealth without due right. And in the Sahihain, the Prophet sent Abdullah ibn Lutbiyya to collect the zakah, and he was given a gift by somebody, and he said to the Prophet, this is for you, and this is the gift given to me. And the Prophet told him, هَلَّا جَلَسَ فِي بَيْتِ أَبِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ فَيَنْظُرْ هَلْ يُهْدَى لَهُ. Why does he not just sit in the home of his father and mother and then see is a gift given to him or not? Meaning to say the only reason why this gift is given to him is because he is a state worker collecting the zakah. And so the one giving the gift hopes that this worker will show favoritism to him. We're also told in the hadith, وَلَا تَغْدِرُوا, do not betray. This is a major sin. Severe warning is given in the Sahih, where every treacherous person will have a flag raised for him on Yawm al-Qiyamah. هَذِهِ غَدْرَةُ فُلَانٍ. This is the treachery of Fulan. Everyone will be able to see him, and he will be exposed and humiliated. We take a vital lesson that you can take jizya from the mushrikeen, because the Prophet said, وَإِذَا لَقِيتَ عَدُوَّكَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. When you meet your enemy from the mushrikeen. And this is a vital point, because some ulama said that the jizya is only taken from the Ahlul Kitab. As for the mushrikeen, they are to be fought unless they convert to Islam. And this is not a strong opinion. Also, the Prophet took jizya from the Majus of a place called Hajar. And the Majus are not from the Ahlul Kitab. As for the ayah, number 29 of Surah At-Tawbah, which talks about fighting the Ahlul Kitab until they give the jizya by hand and they are humiliated. And the answer is no, because Allah Jalla wa Ala says, fight those who do not believe in Allah and the last day, and they do not make haram what Allah and the Messenger have made haram, and they do not adhere to the deen of the truth. And this applies to Ahlul Kitab and Mushrikeen. As for the specific mention of Ahlul Kitab, then mentioning a specific element of the generality does not denote takhsis. For example, you can make tayammum from that which is on the surface of the earth, which is pure and goodly. But then another narration tells us that the dust can be used to make tayammum. This is not a takhsis, because dust is from the things which are on the surface of the land, but it is not the only thing on the surface of the land. So this is not a takhsis, it is not a specification being made. And we have spoken about this in our presentation of Usul al-Fiqh. A second way to argue would be to say that if we have an evidence which affirms that the Prophet took jizya from the non-Ahlul Kitab, then this needs to be given precedence because, as they say, al-muthbit muqaddam ala nafi. That which affirms a rule takes precedence over that which does not affirm it. Why? Because that which affirms it gives us more knowledge. And again, this is a matter of usul al-fiqh which we have spoken about. Note also about the fighting, we only engage in warfare if we are able to do so. If not, then you are throwing yourselves into destruction, and Allah Jalla wa Ala forbids that. Also, we find that if you surround your enemy and they have locked themselves up in a fort and they want Allah's protection, do not grant them that, but rather grant them your protection, because it may be that the Muslims break this contract of protection, and then it will be breaking Allah's protection or Allah's covenant. And this is far worse than breaking your own personal contract. Likewise, do not let them come out by the command of Allah, but rather by the command of the leader of the army, or judging them using the law of Allah Jalla wa Ala, because you do not know whether your law or the ruling that you pass will agree with Allah Jalla wa Ala. So generally speaking, a mufti should not say that this is the Sharia of Allah, because there's no way he can know for sure that this is the Sharia of Allah. It may be that the other opinion of the scholars is the correct one, except for those matters on which there is a consensus. For example, pork being haram or dead meat being haram, then you can say this is the Sharia of Allah Jalla wa Ala, because nobody disagrees. So we say that the leader is going to make his ijtihad in the hope that it agrees with Allah Jalla wa Ala. Of course, when the mujtahid gets it right, as we saw, he has 2 rewards, and if he lands on the wrong answer, he has 1 reward, and no sin to his credit. Even if one makes ijtihad on behalf of someone else, for example, somebody appoints you to sell his merchandise, and you sell it to the best of your ability for a price which you feel is reasonable, but then it becomes known that the actual market value of this commodity was far higher than that which you sold it for. However, you made your ijtihad, so there is no blame on you, and you do not stand as a guarantor. So whether you're a wakil for someone, whether you're a wali of a yatim, whether you're a wasi in charge of a wasiyah, whether you're a nadhir in charge of a waqf, in all of these jobs you're working for someone else. And in all of these affairs, if you make your ijtihad and it turns out that your decision was not in the best interest of the one you're working for, then there is no blame on you. So you see, whether it concerns the rights of others or the rights of Allah Jalla wa Ala, as long as you make ijtihad, you are not to be blamed. Let us take a look at the next chapter. The command to show leniency. From Abu Musa, the Prophet would tell the people whom he would send to others, he would advise them, بَشِّرُوا وَلَا تُنَفِّرُوا وَيَسِّرُوا وَلَا تُعَسِّرُوا. Give glad tidings, and do not create aversion in their minds, and show them leniency, meaning make ease, and do not create hardship. This hadith is not only a hadith, as you've just heard, but rather it could be considered as a qa'idah, as a general maxim. So for example, in the text of the hadith in the Quran, we have many ayat and ahadith which are scary, which create harrowing thoughts in terms of the punishment and Jahannam and so on. Okay, that's fine, but along with that, you must make mention of those other texts which create happy thoughts and give you a sense of elation, like Jannah and the rewards and so on. And so thus you maintain a balance, and this is what makes you attractive. The more balanced your arguments can be, the more attractive they will be in the minds of the people you are addressing. But if your arguments and what you're saying do not have any balance, then you will create nafra, which is aversion. And the Prophet said, وَلَا تُنَفِّرُوا. Do not create aversion in the minds of the people. And when you give a ruling that something is haram, always try to give a halal alternative. Never leave a void, because that void will be filled up by something else which is haram. So always maintain a balance. Also from the advice is to begin with the basics about which there is no dispute, and then gradually build up. Of course, when we talk about creating ease, it must not be at the expense of giving up principles or sacrificing your integrity with Allah Jalla wa Ala. No, principles and integrity must be maintained. You wouldn't say, well, you're living in a place in which the hijab is not fashionable and it may cause problems, so therefore let's just create ease and tell the women that they do not need to wear the hijab in this particular country. Something of that sort where you lose your principles and integrity to Allah Jalla wa Ala. And from not creating aversion is also to bear differences of opinion of the scholars. For example, Imam Ahmed says that if he's praying behind an imam who makes dua al-qunut in the Salat al-Subh, then he would still say Ameen, even though he does not believe that the dua in the Salat al-Subh is legislated. We're talking about the dua al-qunut. But this is a difference of opinion amongst scholars. So with these types of affairs, you bear the other person's opinion and you go along with it. Or for example, a person eats camel meat and is now leading the prayer and you are praying behind him. But you are of the opinion that camel meat breaks the wudu. So as far as your fiqh is concerned, your imam's wudu is broken and hence he should not be leading the salah. But as far as his fiqh is concerned, his wudu is intact. So what do? Do you pray behind him? Or do you say, no, his wudu is not intact, therefore I'm going to pray by myself or with another jama'ah? No, you do not do this. You bear the difference of opinion. You bear it. And you pray behind him. These types of scholarly ikhtilaf should be tolerated. Also, a great example of bearing other people with patience is what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah said to the Jahmiyyah. When he spoke to them, he said that if you people had the knowledge which I have, I would make takfir upon you. That is, declare you to be kuffar. But Ibn Taymiyyah did not declare these people to be kuffar because they were ignorant. They did not know many affairs about the deen of Islam. So they were ignorant. And so therefore they are excused for the things they do and believe in. Another example of a mistake is with the Salat al-Taraweeh, or what is the Qiyamul Layl in Ramadan. Those who believe that 11 raka'at should be prayed will not stay with the imam who's praying 23 raka'at. They will leave. And this is a mistake. Rather, the sunnah is to pray with the imam. Yes, it's true, there is a difference of opinion on this matter, but this difference of opinion should be tolerated, especially when we do not have a clear-cut evidence which limits the number of raka'at that should be prayed in the nighttime prayer. And in another narration of the same chapter, the Prophet said, وَتَطَاوَعَا وَلَا تَخْتَلِفَا. Obey each other and do not differ. So wherever we can unite and tolerate differences of opinion, that ought to be done. And we must not have so much tashaddud. We are so strict and severe in just following our own opinion that we do not tolerate other opinions. As long as there is room for ijtihad, then this ought to be tolerated because unity is far more important. It's the same thing with people in the same country starting Ramadan on different days, despite the fact that they're in the same country. And this is because they want to stick to their own madhab. And rather, it is the unity which is far more important. And the difference of opinion in the fiqh ought to be tolerated. Remember what the Prophet said, وَتَطَاوَعَا وَلَا تَخْتَلِفَا. So تَطَاوَعَا means work in collaboration. وَلَا تَخْتَلِفَا. Do not be divided or differ amongst yourself.
Okay, now we know that jihad was not legislated immediately. So how was it legislated then? Well, it was done in stages, much like the prohibition of alcohol, which was done in stages. So jihad was legislated in stages. 4, to be precise. So here they are. Stage number 1. You are not to fight. And this was in Mecca, when the Muslimin were weak, and the vast minority. Allah Jalla wa Ala teaches us, قُلْ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا يَغْفِرُوا لِلَّذِينَ لَا يَرْجُونَ أَيَّامَ اللَّهِ لِيَجْزِيَ قَوْمًا بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. Say to the believers to forgive those who do not hope for the reward of the hereafter, that Allah may requite everyone for what they have earned. So you forgive them, do not fight them, despite the fact that they are torturing you. And there are other ayat as well. For example, فَاصْدَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرُ وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Openly preach what you have been ordered to do and turn away from the mushrikeen. Phase number 2 in Medina. This is the mere permission to fight those if they fight you or oppress you. In Surah Al-Hajj, أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتَلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى نَصْرِهِمْ لَقَدِيرٌ. permission to fight is given to those believers who are fought against because they have been oppressed, and Allah is able to give them victory. So notice, this is not an order, it is a mere permission. You can do it or not, it's up to you. The third phase is an order. It becomes obligatory to fight only those who begin fighting you or are at loggerheads with you. So those of the kuffar who are not fighting you, do not pay them any attention. Just those kuffar who are your enemies and your military adversaries, they are to be fought by way of obligation, not by choice now. In Surah Al-Baqarah, which is a Madani surah, قاتلوا في سبيل الله الذين يقاتلونكم ولا تعتدوا إن الله لا يحب المعتدين. Fight in the way of Allah those who fight you and do not transgress, meaning fight other than them. Indeed, Allah does not like those who transgress. Similarly, in Surah An-Nisa, فَإِنْ اعْتَزَلُوكُمْ فَلَمْ يُقَاتِلُوكُمْ وَأَلْقَوْا إِلَيْكُمُ السَّلَمَ فَمَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ عَلَيْهِمْ سَبِيلًا. If they keep away from you and do not fight you and are at peace with you, then Allah has not given you authority to fight them. And then we have the fourth phase, which is to fight every kafir, friend or foe, after the da'wah has been given to them. And this is in order to make Islam prevail across the lands. This order was issued right towards the end of the Prophet's career. It happened after the Hajj in the 9th year, which Abu Bakr was leading, as the Prophet could not lead this Hajj because of the delegations. The long hadith which we have just covered talks about this phase. In Surah At-Tawbah, قاتلوا الذين لا يؤمنون بالله ولا باليوم الآخر ولا يحرمون ما حرم الله ورسوله ولا يدينون دين الحق من الذين أوتوا الكتاب حتى يعطوا الجزية عن يد وهم صاغرون. Fight those who do not believe in Allah and the last day, do not make haram what Allah and the Messenger have made haram, and they do not adhere to the truthful lifestyle from those who are given the book until they hand over the jizya and they are humiliated. Similarly, in Surah Al-Anfal, وَقَاتِلُوهُمْ حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً وَيَكُونَ الدِّينُ كُلُّهُ لِلَّهِ فَإِنِ انْتَهُوا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. Fight them until there is no fitna, meaning kufr, and the whole deen is for Allah. But if they desist from their kufr, then Allah surely sees what they are doing. So these are the 4 stages. Now, it's important to note that there is no abrogation here between the phases. The first phase is not abrogated. In other words, if the Muslims find themselves politically weak, maybe living in a kafir country, then they will behave just like the Muslims in Mecca behaved. They will not fight back on account of the deen. So you treat each situation on its merits. We may also learn that we should go easy and be sensitive to the one who has newly embraced Islam. Because when the Prophet sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari to Al-Yaman to call the people to Islam, the Yemenis would have been newly reverted Muslims, of course. And he told both of them to go easy on the people and to not create hardship, such as, for example, making the salah so long that they run out of patience, as, for example, Mu'adh ibn Jabal did once with his people praying the Salat al-Isha. And the Prophet said that you are being a fattan, you are putting people to fitna. Now, this absolutely must be avoided because it will make people averse to the deen. So be mindful of what you say and how you act.
The next chapter is about the prohibition of treachery. From Ibn Umar, the Prophet said, إِذَا جَمَعَ اللَّهُ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَالْآخِرِينَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ يُرْفَعُ لِكُلِّ غَادِرٍ لِوَاءٍ فَقِيلَ هَذِهِ غَدْرَةُ فُلَانِ بْنِ فُلَانٍ. When Allah collects the first and the last of the people on Yawm al-Qiyamah, for every treacherous person there will be a flag which is raised, and it will be said, this is the treachery of Fulan, the son of Fulan. Treachery is normally done in privacy. That is exactly what enables the treacherous person to get away with it. But of course on Yawm al-Qiyamah there will be no such thing as privacy for the evildoers who are doomed. Their evil sins will be exposed not just to those from whom they were trying to hide, but also their treachery will be exposed to the rest of mankind, the first and the last. One cannot even begin to imagine the embarrassment and the torment. This hadith, because it is a specific warning, it proves to us that treachery is from the kaba'ir. Also, can take that people will be named after their father on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Because he says Fulan ibn Fulan. He did not say Fulana, which would be the feminine version. In another narration, it says that the flag will be raised to the extent of their treachery, because not all treachery is equally as evil. Some are more evil than others, and there is no treachery worse than that done by the ruler, as the Prophet explains to us in one of the narrations. Because the treachery of the ruler, firstly, he has no reason to be treacherous. He has total power, so he can do things which people do not like. And then secondly, his treachery is going to affect a larger number of people than somebody else's one-to-one treachery, let's say. And every time a ruler does not act in the interest of his people, then he has betrayed them. Let's take the next chapter, the permissibility of deception in the case of a war. From Jabir ibn Abdullah, the Prophet said, Al-Harbu Khuda'a. War is deception. So this includes psychological warfare. For example, you show yourself to be stronger than what you really are, to gain the psychological edge. When the Prophet marched to Mecca to conquer it, he ordered that fires be lit up so that the army looks stronger and mightier and a lot fiercer, to strike terror and fright into the hearts of the kuffar. And also, the Prophet would pretend to go one direction with his army, yet he intends to go a completely different direction. And this is so that news does not reach that the Prophet is marching towards his intended enemies, so that everyone else will think that the Prophet is going somewhere else. So this is the sort of thing we're speaking about when you keep your secrets. And the reason why this is so important is because you want the element of surprise. So we say that deception is to be rebuked except in a case of war. Otherwise, even if somebody deceives you, you do not deceive them. The Prophet ﷺ said, أَدِّ الْأَمَانَةَ إِلَى مَنِ ائْتَمَنَكَ وَلَا تَخُنْ مَنْ خَانَكَ. Render back the trusts to the one who entrusted you, and do not betray the one who betrays you. That hadith is in the Sunan and other collections. Let's take the next chapter. One should not desire an encounter with the enemy, but if you do meet the enemy, then be patient. Abdullah ibn Abi Awfa wrote to Umar ibn Ubaidullah when he was marching to meet the Haruriya, that is the Khawarij. He informed him that the Prophet ﷺ, when he would be marching out to meet the enemy, he would wait until the sun declined from its zenith. And the Prophet would stand up and tell his men, Ya ayyuhan nas, la tatamannaw liqa al-aduwi was'alu Allah al-afiyah, فإذا لقيتموهم فاصبروا وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ الْجَنَّةَ تَحْتَ ظِلَالِ السُّيُوفِ. O people, do not hope for the meeting of your enemy, and ask Allah for well-being and safety. But if you do meet them, then be patient, and know that Jannah is beneath the shade of the swords. And then he would make a dua, Allahumma munzil al-kitab, mujri al-sahab, hazim al-ahzab, ihzimhum wansurna alayhim. O Allah, the one who sends down the book, the one who disperses the clouds, and the one who defeats the hordes of people. Defeat them and help us to victory against them. We find that as long as you are in safety and well-being, then you need to continue being in safety and well-being, and not hope that this afiyah, or well-being and safety, be destroyed by your meeting the enemy. The problem with hoping to meet the enemy is that it could create complacency, so that you belittle the enemy and you deem yourself to be too good and you become arrogant. And this will inevitably lead to your downfall when you are complacent of your enemies and see yourself to be too good and that this war will be just a walk in the park. That is not the attitude that the Muslim army must have, and it must never underestimate any of its enemies. Also note in the narration how the Prophet would wait for the sun to decline from the zenith, because then the wind would start to blow and it will become easier to fight. So the lesson is, choose the best time for the fight. Also we find the legislation of this dua which he makes, O Allah, the one who sends down the book, making tawassul with the attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala. because the purpose of the jihad is to make the book of Allah the highest in the land, the one who disperses the clouds. From the clouds comes rain, which gives life to the dead earth, and the book of Allah Jalla wa Ala gives life to the dead soul. The one who destroys the hordes or the groups. This is again making tawassul, because we are hoping that he will destroy the horde or the ahzab standing before us. And he says, ihzimhum wansurna alayhim, defeat them and help us to victory against them. Let's take a look at the next chapter. The desirability of praying for victory. From Ibn Awfa, that the Prophet will make dua against the enemy groups. Allahumma munzil al-kitab sari' al-hisab ihzim al-ahzab Allahumma ahzimhum wa zalzilhum. O Allah, the one who sends down the book, the one who is swift in reckoning, defeat the hordes of enemy. O Allah, defeat them and shake them. This dua is similar to the one which we came across in the last chapter. The point is that making dua against your enemy is recommended, and making dhikr of Allah Jalla wa Ala, and also keeping patient, as we learned from the previous chapter. Let's take the next chapter, the prohibition of killing women and children in war. From Abdullah ibn Umar, he says that in one of the battle expeditions, the Prophet found a woman killed, and the Prophet disapproved of killing women and children. The reason why this should be is what we have spoken about before. Firstly, they are not fighters, and they are not helping in the fight in any way or form. Therefore, you're not allowed to kill them. Secondly, women and children are more apt to embracing Islam than men. Why? Because they are more humble than men. And also a third reason is because if the Muslims win the war, then these people will be servants for the Muslims, and that is advantageous for the Muslim community. So these are at least three reasons why non-combatants should not be attacked. The next chapter about killing women and children in night raids if it is not done deliberately. From As-Sa'ab ibn Jathama, he says the Prophet was asked about some women and children being killed in a night raid against the mushrikeen, and the Prophet replied, Hum minhum, they are from them. This narration follows the qaida, the maxim, يَثْبُتُ تَبَعًا مَا لَا يَثْبُتُ إِسْتِقْلَالًا. That which is not upheld independently can still be upheld if it follows something else. So independently, you're not allowed to kill women and children. However, if they come into the firing line and happen to die, then there is no sin upon you, because they are in following the combatants whom you were fighting. So if, for example, the kuffar are using women and children to defend themselves, so putting them on the front line, in the hope that the Muslims will not fight, then no, you do not stop. You can fight them, and if the women and children are killed, then you did not intend to kill them. Rather, the fault lies with the kuffar. In fact, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah says that if the kuffar are using other Muslims to shield themselves, you're still allowed to fight. And if you happen to kill Muslims in doing so, then so be it. As for the Muslim who has died in this battle, then he will be a shaheed. That is to say, the Muslim being used as a shield by the kuffar. Because when we have a conflict of pursuing an interest, which is here to defeat the kuffar, and avoiding a harm or a corruption, which is here killing another Muslim or women and children, then we need to look at which one is the more powerful. If they are both about equal strength, then we give precedence to leaving off or warding off the harm. But if one is more powerful than the other, then that is what we pursue. So in this particular instance, pursuing the kuffar and vanquishing them is more of a powerful benefit than the harm of killing women and children, and indeed Muslims. So this is the general principle that we follow. Let's take the next chapter about cutting down the trees of the kuffar and burning them. From Abdullah ibn Umar, he says that the Prophet ordered the date palm trees of Banu Nadir be burnt and to be cut down, and these palms were at a place called Juwairiya. And Allah Jalla wa Ala sent down the ayah in relation to this event in Surah Al-Hashr, مَا قَضَعْتُم مِّن لِينَةٍ أَوْ تَرَكْتُمُوهَا قَائِمَةً عَلَى أُصُولِهَا فَبِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ وَلِيُخْزِيَ الْفَاسِقِينَ. And whatever tree you cut down or left standing on their trunks, it was with the permission of Allah, so that He may disgrace the wrongdoers. We take from this the permissibility of cutting down the trees and other wealth of the kuffar, if it means that we are able to reach them and vanquish them. Or perhaps if these trees, let's say, are guarding the kuffar, just like what we said with women, children and other Muslims. That is, the kuffar are using the wealth to guard themselves.
hoping that the Muslims will not cut down their wealth. Otherwise, the general rule is you do not cut down other people's wealth, because if you beat the enemies, then their wealth will be our wealth. So why would you want to destroy your potential wealth? Let's take a look at the next chapter about the ghanima being made halal for this ummah specifically. A long narration. Let's take the translation. Abu Hurairah narrates that the Prophet said, one of the Prophets went on jihad. He said to his followers, the one who has been married and wants to consummate his marriage but has not yet done so, he should not come with me. And anyone who has built a house but has not yet erected its roof should not follow me. And anyone who has bought goats and pregnant she-camels and is waiting for their children should not follow me. So after that he marched and approached a village at about the time of Salat al-Asr. And so the sun was about to go down, so it was about to set, and the Prophet said, Anti ma'mura, wa ana ma'mur, Allahumma ahbisha alayya shay'an. You, O sun, are ordered, and I too am ordered. O Allah, keep the sun from setting for a little while. And so indeed the sun stopped from setting until Allah granted the Prophet and his people victory. The people gathered the ghanima, which is the booty. A fire approached the ghanima, and it was supposed to devour this ghanima, but it did not do so. And the Prophet said to his people, one of you is guilty of ghulul, stealing from the war booty. That is why the fire is not devouring the ghanima. He said, Fikum al-ghulul, in you there is ghulul. So he said, a man from each tribe should swear fealty to me, that is, to give an oath of allegiance. And so that's what happened. A representative from each tribe shook the hand of the Prophet, until the hand of one of these men stuck to the hand of the Prophet. To which the Prophet said, Fikum al-ghulul, amongst your tribe there is ghulul. So he said, let all the members of your tribe swear fealty to me, one by one. And they did so. And the hands of 2 or 3 people from that tribe stuck to the hand of that Prophet. And he said to them, Fikum al-ghulul, you have misappropriated some of the ghanima. And so when they searched, they took out gold equal in volume to the head of a bull. And they placed that amongst the rest of the ghanima. And then the fire did approach the ghanima and consumed it. The Prophet ﷺ, commenting on this narration, فَلَمْ تَحِلَّ الْغَنَائِمُ لِأَحَدٍ قَبْلَنَا, Ghanima was not made halal for anyone before us. ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى رَأَى ضَعْفَنَا وَعَجْزَنَا فَطَيَّبَهَا لَنَا. That is because Allah saw our weakness and incapability, and He made the ghanima goodly for us. Firstly, the Prophet here does not mention which Prophet it was who was on this war. It does not make a difference too much with regards to the rulings and the fawaid which we can take, but it has been mentioned that this Prophet was Yusha, who was the Prophet after Musa a.s., who entered Jerusalem and conquered it because the followers of Musa a.s. were cowards, most of them at least. In any case, he says, لا يتبعني رجل قد ملك بضع امرأة وهو يريد أن يبني بها ولما يبني. That anyone who has married a woman has not consummated marriage with her should not follow me. Why would he say this? Well, the answer ought to be obvious, because his heart and mind will be attached to his wife, whereas a soldier's heart and mind needs to be attached to warfare. And so such a person is likely to be a liability, not an asset to the army. In fact, some ulama say that in this particular situation, where he has married her and has not consummated marriage but wants to consummate marriage, and he can even leave off the Salat al-Jama'ah, because such a person is not likely to have any khushu' in his salah. It's the same with the second type of person as well. وَلَا آخَرُ قَدْ بَنَى بُنْيَانًا وَلَمَّا يَرْفَعْ سُقْفَهَا. Neither the person who has built a house but not yet built its roof, because again his heart and mind will be attached to the house rather than warfare. It will just be a distraction and he will become a liability. وَلَا آخَرْ قَدْ اشْتَرَى غَنَمًا أَوْ خَلِفَاتٍ وَهُوَ مُنْتَظِرٌ وِلَادَهَا. Neither the person who has bought some sheep or some pregnant she-camel and is waiting for them to give birth. For the same reason, he's going to be a liability. So the matter is not about the quantity of soldiers, the matter revolves around the quality. The Prophet is narrating to us this story of a previous Prophet, just like the Quran does. لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. In their stories there is a lesson for people of sound intellect. We find a miracle of the Prophet. He makes dua for the sun to stop from setting, and he makes dua to Allah Jalla wa Ala, not to the sun itself. He does not order the sun to stop, because the sun does not do anything on its own accord. We take the vital lesson that the previous nations were not allowed to take the ghanimah. Rather, a fire would come down from the sky and consume it. We learn that ghulul was haram for the previous nations. That is why the fire did not consume it, and the Prophet realized what the problem was. But to decide who was guilty, we have this wondrous way which Allah Jalla wa Ala taught this Prophet. We take the bounty of Allah Jalla wa Ala on this nation, that He has made the ghanimah halal for us. The Prophet said in Sunan Abi Dawud and in a mu'allaq form in al-Bukhari that my rizq, my provision has been made under the shade of my spear. So he's talking about the ghanimah. The Prophet says that Allah has seen our da'af, our weakness. This is not the weakness in iman, rather financial weakness. Let's take the next chapter about the anfal from Mus'ab ibn Sa'ad, who heard from his father saying, 4 ayat were revealed regarding me. He says, I found a sword amongst the anfal. He says, O Messenger of Allah, bestow it upon me. And the Prophet told him, Da', leave it. And then he came again, and the Prophet told him, Da'hu min haythu akhadhta, put it back where you found it. And then he asked again, give this to me. And the Prophet said again, Da', leave it. And then he came again, and he said to the Prophet, give it to me. أَأُجْعَلُ كَمَنْ لَا غِنَىٰ لَهُ, should I be treated like the one who has no share in the booty? The Prophet told him yet again, دَعْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَخَذْتَ, put it where you took it. And Allah revealed the ayah, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَنْفَالِ قُلِ الْأَنْفَالُ لِلَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ. They ask you about the spoils of war. Say, the spoils of war are for Allah and the Messenger. So, firstly, what is the anfal? It is that which is taken from the war booty. And it is, as we have just seen, for Allah and the Messenger. Before the Prophet was given a choice where to put this wealth, he could distribute it amongst the fighters or wherever else he wanted, until Allah Jalla wa Ala revealed in Surah Al-Anfal, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا غَنِمْتُمْ, know that whatever you take as war booty, then 1/5 of it is to be for Allah and the Messenger and the near kindred and orphans and for the wayfarer. We take from the narration that if you pick up something that you have no right to, then you must leave it or put it back from where you took it, not in another place. Notice here that the companion did not obey the first time round, rather he came back 3 more times asking the Prophet to give him this sword. And this is slightly similar to what the Sahaba did when the Prophet ordered them to change their Hajj into an Umrah. They said that should we leave for Mina and we are dripping with semen, meaning from sexual intercourse with our wives, so they're asking, how can we have intercourse between the Hajj and the Umrah? So we find that this is not an act of disobedience if you want to seek a clarification on the ruling, or perhaps you feel that the one giving the order may change his mind. We find that Allah and the Messenger can be mentioned side by side together when it comes to matters of the Sharia, as in the anfal are for Allah and the Messenger, so they're mentioned side by side. As for matters of qadr, or decree, Allah cannot be mentioned side by side with anyone else. So you cannot say what Allah and you willed.
Rather, at best, you can say what Allah willed and then what you willed. Also, a few more important points. Note that when we say that war is deception, that is certainly true. However, deception is not the same as treachery. Treachery can never ever be halal in all cases, war or peace. By treachery, we mean that you have a contract of peace between your state and another kafir state. And whilst this contract is in effect, you stab them in the back, or you attack them unaware. That is treachery, al-khiyana. And as the narration says, for every treacherous person there will be a flag, and he will be known and shamed with this flag. So in all cases, you are not allowed to break a contract which is in effect. Yes, it's true, you can choose to end the contract, no problem, but you cannot choose to renege on the contract. Then one might ask, is lying allowed then to your enemies? We say if you can use equivocation, that is the first port of call. However, if that is not possible, then outright lying is allowed to an enemy nation with whom you do not have any contract of peace. And we have textual evidence for this, both in Sahih Muslim, also in the Sunan as well, where lying is allowed on 3 occasions. Number 1, war. Number 2, to save your marriage, as in to speak some goodly words to your wife or to your spouse, to create some reconciliation. even if you do not actually mean it. And thirdly, if you have two parties who are at war with each other, then to speak some words to pacify their anger against each other, even if what you're saying is not actually true. Now one might say, but war is a whole lot more than just deception, right? You have to actually fight. We say yes, but the most important part of any war is deception, because you need that cutting edge over your enemy. So the Prophet is talking about the most important part, just as, for example, the Prophet would say, Al-Hajju Arafah. The Hajj is to perform the standing at Arafah. But the Hajj is so much more. However, the absolute main point about the Hajj and the heart of the matter is the Arafah, because there's no flexibility here, whereas there is flexibility with regards to other rites of the Hajj. Similarly, he said, An-nadmu tawbah. Regret is tawbah. Yes, it's true. Regret is a major part of tawbah, and he's mentioning the most essential element of tawbah. But there are other elements as well, such as when you're not going to repeat the sin, and you make that resolution. And there are other parts as well. Also, an interesting point, the Prophet made dua by saying, "O Allah, the one who sends down the book. This is for your rizq in the afterlife. By following the Quran, you have success and rizq in the afterlife." And then he says, Mujri as-sahab, the one who makes the clouds move in the air. This is for your provision in the dunya, because from the clouds comes the rain, from there comes the crops. So he's talking about the rizq in the akhirah and in this dunya. Then he says, Hazim al-ahzab, the one who defeats the confederates, meaning the different groups that have combined together and rallied against Islam, because in defeating the confederates, it preserves the ni'mah of the dunya and the akhirah. This is a comment that was made by Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah. Also, in the Prophet making the dua, we find that victory does not depend on your number nor your military prowess. It depends on Allah Jalla wa Ala. That's why you turn to Him and depend on Him, not on your number and not on your machine guns. وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَكِيمِ. And victory is only from Allah, the Al-Aziz and Hakim. Also, Mus'ab ibn Sa'd said that there were 4 ayat of the Quran revealed about me. What are these ayat? These are coming up in the Kitab al-Fada'il, so we'll delay it till then. Also, the Anfal mentioned in the Hadith, quoting the ayah from Surah Al-Anfal. What is this Anfal? It is from the word nafil or nafila, meaning extra. So this is the extra wealth that the Prophet may distribute amongst certain soldiers. And this decision is down to the Prophet or whoever the leader of the army is. Okay, at this stage, let's take some review questions. So, question number 1. Is it permissible to raid the enemy when they are unaware? Give the detail to this answer. Question number 2. This idea of killing women and children in a war and also destroying the enemy's wealth in a war. Is it permissible or not? Give the detail to this answer. Question number 3. In the context of the war, what do we mean by al-ghulul?